Tax sale investing can be an incredible opportunity to build wealth, but many new investors face major hidden issues that can turn what seems like a great deal into financial disaster. Before we get started, my name is Casey Denman. I've been a tax sale investor for more than 22 years now, and I've been training other new investors for the last decade through my books, podcasts, videos, and the training platform that I operate at taxselacademy.com. So let's get back to these hidden problems that many investors just don't know to look for. Problems in this business are not always going to be related to the obvious stuff, like a property in a bad location or a house that's been burnt to the ground. Instead, some of these problems are going to be hidden in county records, hidden in legal descriptions, and other places that new investors might not know how to check thoroughly enough. So today I'm going over 10 of the biggest hidden issues in tax sale investing. Now, hopefully by the end of this episode, you'll know exactly what to look for and how to avoid making these same costly mistakes. Let's get right to it. The first one is strips of land and useless parcels. So if a piece of property gets sold for $1, is it too good to be true? More than likely, yes. Every tax sale investor gets very excited when they see these crazy cheap prices, myself included. Now, I have episodes on how I purchase properties for $20 or less than $100 and other incredibly cheap properties. But these came after years and years of investing and just being in the right place at the right time, of preparing myself to take advantage of those opportunities when they did get put in front of me. But if you are brand new to this business and the first property that you see is stupid cheap for like $5, it might be that way for a reason. There's a number of reasons when it comes to vacant land, for example, that it can be completely useless. You have small slivers of land that you can't do anything with, right? Say a 2-foot by 300-foot long strip of land sitting between two properties. Or maybe it's a tiny leftover piece of property from somebody else's backyard that maybe they portion it off to sell for some reason to a family member or something, and it has no access to boot, right? I've seen that many times. Or we have leftover parcels from old subdivisions created by mistake when the land was subdivided decades ago. So how do you avoid it? You check the property dimensions before bidding. That's one thing. Don't just assume that it's a standard lot. Just because something is an acre or 5 acres does not mean it is useful. Because after all, it could be 1 foot wide and very long and still measure out to be an acre or two. Something else you can do is look at the GIS maps or the county plat maps to see the actual shape and location of the property and cross-reference that information with the requirements in the area you're investing in. You can also compare it to neighboring properties. If it's a very thin strip, maybe just a red line between two houses, it's probably one of those leftover properties I was talking about. I actually did a video not too long ago on a gentleman in Florida that thought he was buying a villa, but he bought that strip of land between two villas. Actually, it was the dividing line between two attached villas, if I remember correctly. So be very careful, perform thorough diligence. The next one, landlocked properties. You would not believe how many investors that I've seen try to talk themselves into buying a landlocked piece of real estate, just hoping they can somehow get access to it. Sure, $5,000 for 10 acres, that sounds amazing until you realize you cannot access the property and you never will be able to. Landlocked properties are properties that have no legal access to a road. That means that you cannot physically get there without trespassing on somebody else's land, unless, of course, maybe you land by helicopter or something. But these are properties you can't access. Most normal people can't access unless you have a helicopter. These properties might seem like a bargain, but unless you can negotiate access rights with the adjoining landowners, they're often worthless because you can't get to them. That's the entire reason they're there in the first place. That's the entire reason they are so cheap. The prior owner did not think that it was even worth the taxes to try to find some way to access it. Can you make these work? Yes, sometimes. But for a new investor, that's probably not a path you want to go down. So how do you avoid it? Look at aerial maps, look at parcel overlays, look at GIS maps prior to bidding. Make sure there's a public road or a recorded easement leading to that property. And you can check the county records for these things. Some landlocked properties that you do see on a GIS map might have a recorded easement, might have a sliver of land, might have some sort of access to them. But oftentimes, if it's at a tax sale, the reason it's there is because it's landlocked with no legal access. And if, of course, you do want to go down the route of trying to acquire some sort of access to the property, my suggestion is to work out a negotiation, work out a deal with the adjoining property owners prior to buying that property and just hoping for the best. Next one, demolition orders and code violations. So let's say you found a dilapidated house for $100. That might just be because it'll be turned into a vacant lot next week because they'll demolish that house, and then you, the investor that bought that property for $100, now gets the demolition bill. Many investors will buy tax deed homes without realizing that the city already has demolition plans for that property. That means that the government is planning to bulldoze that house. So you, as the brand new owner of this tax deed house that was scheduled to be demolished, you can go to the county and hopefully talk them into delaying the demolition or canceling it entirely while you fix up the property. Or you can let them demolish the house, or you might not have a choice. They might demolish it anyhow. But remember that not only do you have to deal with now selling a vacant lot instead of a house, some counties, some cities will target the tax sale investors with the demolition bills. It's not uncommon in certain areas to buy a property with a dilapidated house, to have that house knocked down a week after the deed is recorded, and then the investor gets a bill for $40,000, $50,000. Investors make great targets when cities are trying to recoup some of their money. So keep that in mind. So how can you avoid this whole situation, right? Call the local code enforcement office before bidding and ask if the property has any outstanding issues like demolition order, code violations, structural code violations, anything like that where it might put that property onto the county or the city's demolition list. You should also drive by the house if possible and look for posted signs and notices. If it looks like it's about to fall over, you probably want to skip that property as it has probably already got the attention of the local code enforcement office. The next one, confusing or inaccurate legal descriptions. If you don't understand what you're buying, don't buy it. When you are a tax sale investor, you are not buying a house. You are not buying an address. You are not buying whatever's in the photo that you saw online. You are buying a legally described piece of real estate. You're buying a legal description and whatever sits on it. Sometimes properties at tax sales have really screwed up legal descriptions. For example, you might buy a 10-acre piece of real estate and you got it for $10,000, right? You think it's a fantastic deal, only to learn that you're also now a co-owner with 299 other people because you missed one little section on that legal description that said they were selling a 1/300th interest in that property. Another example might be that you're buying a lot in a subdivision, but you happen to misread the legal description and you completely overlooked the section where it said W5FT. For the west 5 foot, so you only have 5 feet of that lot instead of the entire lot, and it was probably used as a former utility easement or something like that. How do you avoid it? You learn to read legal descriptions. By far, that is the best thing that you can do. And of course, if there are any legals out there that you just don't understand, that do not make sense, it's time to skip that property entirely. Next one, conservation and environmental restrictions. All land is not created equal, that is for sure. A conservation designation means that you cannot develop, build, or even alter the property in many situations. Oftentimes, the land will be designated as conservation land as part of the developmental agreement process. So for example, the developer goes to the city or the county and say, listen, I want to break up this property into half-acre lots. And they say, okay, that's fine, but we want you to have a green space or a park or a buffer in exchange for allowing us to let you develop the rest of the property. No big deal. They cut off a piece of property here or there, make it a buffer, make it a green space, make it whatever, and then somehow or another it ends up on a tax sale list. Another example is things like wetlands, moist lands, flood zone properties that, depending on local laws, might also prevent any sort of building or usage. And as a side note here, a lot of these restrictions are with the land forever. It's not like you just buy the land and you can go and talk nicely to the receptionist at the zoning office and she's like, okay, you can build on it now. It does not work like that. My suggestion is to check the county assessor's report for words like conservation, preserve, protected. Review the land use and the zoning codes for that property against the county's codes. Think logically about the property as well. If it looks like it was designed to be a buffer, a green space, a park, it probably was. And of course, call the county zoning and land use office to confirm what you are allowed to do with the land before you purchase it. Next one, county requirements to purchase. And this is one that actually shocked me the first time that I saw it. I could buy a property, and I could buy it extremely cheap, but I had to provide a bond to the county to ensure that I would fix that property up. I actually had no idea that the county could put certain stipulations on the sale of a piece of real estate through the tax sale process, but in some states they are allowed to. The problem is that many times these stipulations are designed to make that property look as unattractive as possible. And the end goal is that the county wants to take ownership of the property and handle it the way they wish, possibly through demolition of that structure, through some sort of affordable housing programs, something similar like that. The county wants control of that property, so they put these very high barriers to purchase on it. Does it seem crooked? Yeah, sometimes it does, but it does happen, and it's something you need to deal with. And when you step on the county's toes and you buy that property anyhow, and you were supposed to have a bond or you were supposed to have some sort of other assurance that you're going to do what they wanted to with that property, and you don't do it, things can go sideways real fast when they start getting county attorneys involved. So how do you avoid it? Check the county auction rules in advance to see if a bond or any sort of stipulation is required. That way you don't make a mistake. All right, next one. Surviving liens. Tax sale properties are not always free and clear. Now, in general, the tax sale process will wipe out liens against most private parties. Common ones are things like mortgage liens, HOA liens, private party liens like mechanics liens, right? But there is a chance other liens survive. You could still be responsible for governmental liens. Keep that in mind. The most common ones are things for like code enforcement violations, overgrown yards, dilapidated structures, trash ordinances. Now there's ways to deal with these, but they can be shockingly expensive if you are not expecting them. In general, if there is a governmental lien, expect to pay it. If you can negotiate it down or you don't have to, that's great. But if you're concerned about it whatsoever, if you see a governmental lien, expect to pay it. And then of course, if you don't want to pay it, skip that property and move on. So how do you avoid it? Learn to perform your own title search. Inside the Tax Sale Academy, we have an entire training program on tax sale title searches. So outside of paying a title company $200 to $300 per property you're researching, this is a very, very cost efficient and beneficial way to make sure there are no governmental liens against that property. And of course, you can call the county directly as well. Next one, title clouds. I've got dozens of videos on this topic, but this is always one that shocks new investors, so I wanted to include it. Here's the shortest version possible. Conventional real estate, when it's sold, comes with something called title insurance, which insures the buyer against potential claims from outstanding issues within that chain of title. Think of like an old mortgage from 30 years ago coming back, foreclosing, and taking the property. Title insurance protects against this for conventional real estate. Now, when we buy a tax sale property, what happens is title insurance companies are not comfortable insuring the title to that property. They say it's clouded. They won't provide that title insurance, which means we can't get full market value. My first deal got blown all to pieces because I did not understand this part of the puzzle. There's no way to avoid the issue entirely, but you can work around it. If it's cheap enough, sell the property with an as-is title and a quit-claim deed. If it is more valuable, if you have more of a margin, you can also invest in a lawsuit to quiet the title or a tax foreclosure certification. And in some areas, you can simply just hold the property for a period of time and wait out the waiting period, and then the title companies will issue title insurance. Yes, often it's a number of years. This one is hidden. This one shocks everybody, and this one you need to educate yourself on for certain if you're new into this business. The next one, no utility access. So congratulations, you bought a lot in a rural area. Oddly, there are thousands of other vacant lots in that same area, and there's not a single house. Seems kind of weird, right? That might be because there are no utilities in that area, so it is unbuildable. And follow me here. Some tax sale properties do not have access to water, sewer, or power. So when you look at the lot and you look at it from a building standpoint, from what is required of the building department, let's say it's a 1/4 acre and it meets all the setbacks. Like, you can legally put a house there if you can meet the setbacks in your mind, right? But there's another piece of the puzzle. How are you going to provide water, sewer, things like that? In some areas, if there's not public utilities or even private utilities like that services the entire subdivision, you would need to put a septic system in it. You need to put a well in. And in certain areas, laws have been changed since subdivisions were originally developed to the point that the property, while it might be large enough to build, might not be large enough for a septic system, which might require, say, 1/2 of an acre in order to put a private septic system on your property, which probably explains why the area is vacant. So how do you avoid it? You learn the local regulations around the building requirements and the utilities. Take the time to research this information up front before you start researching individual properties. It's extremely important, and it'll also help you become much more efficient in your research since you know what you're looking at. And the last one, let's talk about future debts. Cheap to buy does not mean cheap to own. I can't begin to tell you the number of properties that I've seen that are sold at tax sales with massive future debts. And let me give you an extreme example here. What I'm talking about is something like a property I saw a few years back that was in a country club, vacant lot. And it sold relatively cheap. I don't remember exactly what it sold for, but I do remember that if you were to buy in that country club, you were forced to become a member of that country club as well. Membership there was $100,000. So imagine buying a property. The next week, you get a bill to join the country club with an initiation fee of $100,000. Plus, you also have yearly dues. Plus, you have food and beverage minimums. If you were not expecting that, that'd be a massive shock to you. Or maybe you buy a lot out in the middle of what you think is nowhere, only to realize they have HOA fees for amenities somewhere that are probably dilapidated that amount to $100 or $150 per month. I've seen this many, many times. Or let's say you buy a property and has a ridiculously high tax bill or has a special assessment for sewer or roads or whatever that comes along with it as well. Talk about being shocked a month after purchase when you start receiving those bills, and only then you realize how expensive that property was. Because again, cheap to buy does not mean cheap to own. You can avoid this by doing your research. Plain and simple, know what you are buying. Do that thorough, deep research that I talk about all the time. Do not substitute surface level research. Don't be lazy. Research thoroughly. So there you have it. 10 of the more hidden tax sale issues that often catch new investors by surprise. I've got videos on most of these, so feel free to search my podcast episodes or my YouTube channel if you're interested in one of these specifically. And in the end, just take the time to learn what you're doing. Take the time to educate yourself. Listen, if you enjoyed this episode or any of the episodes here on the Tax Sale Podcast, please do me a huge favor and leave some positive feedback for us. Click that thumbs up button or tap that 5-star rating, as it really makes a huge difference for us. And as always, if we can be of any additional help, be sure to check out our full training academy at taxsaleacademy.com. Hey, take care, folks, and make it a successful day. We'll see you next time right here on the Tax Sale Podcast. Bye-bye.